Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me with Moms for America. Today we are going to talk to my friend Jaco van Zyl from South Africa. We're going to talk about the many things, but especially just the fact that South Africa needs to be a warning. Our job here, our platform here is to empower parents. You can't be informed if you don't know history and you don't know how it repeats itself. So welcome. Thank you for joining me, Jaco.
Thank you, Carrie. Lovely to be here.
All right. So the Dutch had a shipwreck.
So the Dutch had a shipwreck in 1647. But before we go there, we need to appreciate that the Dutch were seafaring people. They brought the world together. They connected the world. They had the biggest fleet back in the 17th century, about 6,000 ships, just to give us an idea of how big that fleet was. And they had trade routes between Holland and the Far East, Batavia. Batavia is Indonesia, and there was a huge challenge because of this enormous distance they had to travel around the southern tip of of Africa to the east, and they traded, they bartered for spices, different kinds of foods that they took back to Holland. So one of the challenges was because of the distance, because of the dangers at sea, a very long trip. They needed a replenishment station, and around the southern tip of Africa in 1647 they suffered shipwreck, and that gave the Dutch the idea: how about we build a replenishment station in what was then called the Cape of Good Hope. And that was what happened. So in 1652, Jan van Riebeeck, he was a young, adventurous seafarer, and his wife Maria, and his sailors, they came to the southern tip of South Africa, and the first thing that they built was a fort under very harsh conditions. They said the land was empty, it was wild, it was rough, it was difficult. There was nothing. And when they meant nothing, when they said nothing, they really meant it. No infrastructure. It was wild.
And no
So
one. That's important, right? No
what's
one was
that?
there. No one was there, correct?
No. So
Okay.
the natives that were there were the first peoples of southern Africa, and they were the Khoi and the San. They were initially called the Hottentots, was the Khoi, and the Bushmen the San. They were further inland. Because these were migrating nomadic peoples. They were small in number, so there were only a few hundred that the land could support. So when the Dutch settled there, they
Your
started
camera
plant.
is your
Oh,
camera is
really?
going crazy. Yeah.
That is so strange. I don't know what to do about that because I'm just using
One on the screen.
laptop.
That's okay. We'll keep going, and if
All
it
right.
I'll also put it into audio, so
Okay.
that'll be fine too. But
Yeah. So um, it was a new climate. The summers were harsh, the winters were wet and cold, there were storms and floods. So even after they started planting trees that they brought from the Netherlands, some of those trees didn't really acclimatize well. Um, People were sick, they were hungry. It was a problem. They had a problem with fresh water, wild animals, strange diseases. But their aim was to survive the harshness, to just outlive the harshness. And that is what they managed to do. So they gradually started building infrastructure in the Cape, and they started farming. They said the soil was difficult for the plow. They really had it difficult. But gradually, they the there were a few Dutch settlers who wanted to become free citizens. They called themselves Vryburgers. Vryburgers literally means free citizens, and they wanted to separate themselves from the Dutch East India Company. They had an issue with the elite that settled in the Cape, so they started moving inland. And as they moved inland, they encountered more of the Khoi and the San. And the Khoi San didn't really like this movement of these newcomers. There was, and as with every other interaction with among different nations and tribes, there was trade, there was conflict, and there was cooperation, as between every other human people, every other time in human history. And gradually they moved inland. They encountered not only the first peoples, but eventually 600 kilometers further, they encountered black people. So while the free burghers, the settlers moved inland towards the interior of South Africa, they also called themselves trakboere. Trakboere, just it says what boer means farmer. So nomadic farmer or migrating farmer. So the trakboere, they moved into the interior, and as they went, they established settlements, always with a church, always with a school, always with farms. They prioritized their religion, they prioritized education, and they were just great farmers. Remember, they were Dutch, and the Dutch are what should we call them, the wizards of nature. They know how to work the forces of nature to yield marvelous crops.
Now, are you
So
from them? Are you from the Afrikaners?
yes, so the earliest ancestor from my father's side, the Van Zyl ancestor, arrived in the Cape in the mid 18th century. So it must have been around 1760, thereabouts. His name was Marius van Zyl. So he was on my paternal lineage. He was the first Dutch person who came to the Cape. So I just want to highlight this. So the Dutch moved inland, but they were also black tribes, and the black tribes were different from the first peoples of Southern Africa, and
The
that
Khoi
is
and the
crucial
San?
to remember. The Khoi
Okay.
and the San were linguistically, genetically, culturally completely separate from the Bantu people. So in anthropology, the Bantu people, they migrated southeastwards from around Cameroon and Nigeria over the Great Lakes in the northern of Zambia and the north of Zimbabwe, further south across northern Transvaal, and eventually they settled in various areas. They settled in Zimbabwe, they settled in Botswana, the Zulus settled in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal as it is called today. The Sutus, they settled in Lesotho in the mountainous region, and they were also conquering peoples. So whenever they encountered a weaker tribe, they fought with them, they pillaged their settlements, they took their spoils, women and children, and they moved along. That is what they did. Every black tribe in the past did the same. And
What were the
the
Khoi and
infi-
San? What would their like genetic makeup have been? Were are they? I know that there's black and there's colored and there's white. And
yes,
colored are that middle group. I would be colored, right?
you would be colored. So within the South African racial classification isn't as anthropologically accurate. So within the colored group, there would be mixed race people, but there would also be a descendants of the Khoi and the San, as well as you need to keep in mind back in the day, slavery was a thing.
Mhm.
So the Dutch East Indian Company also brought slaves from Malaysia to South Africa uh, with the spices, and they were largely Islamic or Muslim, and some of these peoples would also be considered colored. So that's why I'm saying then it's not an anthropologically accurate designation. This colored, it's a conglomeration of various genetic pools.
Okay.
The largest the largest population of Indians outside of mainland India is also in South Africa. So in 1860 thereabouts, indentured slaves were imported from South India, and they were used in sugarcane farming in Natal, towards the east of South Africa. Also, in the middle of the 19th century, gold was discovered in South Africa. The British were very much interested in that. So between 1795 and 1910, South Africa was part of the Commonwealth. They recognized the Queen as their actual monarch between 1795 and 1910. There were various wars fought during this very long period of time. Wars between the Dutch, who moved inland, who encountered various different African tribes. Wars between the Brits and the Zulus in Natal. It was called the Anglo-Zulu War in the 19th century. And towards the end of the 19th century, the two Anglo-Boer wars. And the second Anglo-Boer War was fought between 1899 and 1901. During that time, so by that time, there were various Boer republics established. The Cape, Natal, Free State, and Transvaal. So the Boers have always loved republics. There were various different other republics too. Stellaland and I don't know. Um, because they were Dutch, and the Dutch way of administering um, um, civilization, society, was just in their blood. That was the way in which they operated. Um, Always very religious, Dutch Reformed, and like I said, very much rooted in nature. The Boer, the Afrikaner the Afrikaner has quite a few parallels with Israel, in that they're a nation who struggles with God. They struggle with God all the time. They question God, they worship God, they glorify Him. There's always this strange tension in their relationship with God and the divine, the way they understand Him. They encounter God in nature. They encounter God in the seasons. They pray for rain. They thank God and have harvest festivals when whether the crop was good or not. So they're a worshipping nation, if you can call it that. So the Union of South Africa was established in 1910, when all these different Boer republics were united. One of the questions that was asked was what to do with the Anglos, the Brits who remained behind after independence from Britain, and gradual gradual, what shall I call it, integration with the rest of South Africa was part of the mission, the agenda of the government at the time. In the 1940s, a second question was asked, and the question was what to do with all the African tribes within the territory. And it was a very close call, and it tipped towards apartheid. In 1948, apartheid was established. And the principle of apartheid means separateness. apartness, the hate towards the
Oh,
end is
yeah, yeah.
H-E-I-D, so it's not hate as an H-A-T-E.
Okay.
Apartness, separate cultural development. And they wanted to follow the principles of Europe, where Europeans had different territories and different nations were independently self-governing. And I wanted to introduce something similar to South Africa. Um, so there were different homelands assigned, and the idea was to eventually assign these, or to send black people into these homelands where they would be self-governing. Um, it was a difficult situation, when you think about it, especially with a gold rush and several mines being sunk all over South Africa. Many black people moved to these mines. Several different towns were built too. Many black people formed settlements just around these towns. So they had families, few generations had settled around European, Afrikaner, British establishments. They couldn't own property. And the apartheid mission of sending them into homelands would have been extremely difficult, would have been extremely disruptive psychologically. Some of these homelands were semi-independent, and the aim was for these homelands to eventually gain full independence, like Eswatini, Swaziland, and Lesotho, and Mozambique to the farther east. But by that time, the ANC that was formed in I think it was 1913, had grown to such power that the opposition against the mission was just too big,
Can we
and
stop on a
apartheid.
few? I just have a few
Yes,
questions. The first
of
one, I
course.
want to make it really clear that
Yeah.
apartheid meant separateness, but it didn't
Yes.
mean necessarily, it wasn't necessarily intended to be oppressive, or am I getting that?
No, that is
Okay,
that is quite so. The initial appreciation was that just separate, independent cultural development, self governance. But because of the disruption that it would involve in sending people into these homelands, because of political factions riling up resentment against apartheid, it did become oppressive and violent,
right.
to keep all the masses in their respective areas.
So I want to
Um,
keep that
yeah.
just because, okay, so today, a lot of people will use terms like, well, it's okay to be tribal, right? Like we're all naturally tribal. And a lot of times
Yes.
that does come from the woke that are saying we should be tribal. Let's go back to our tribal roots, which is almost, it sounds like creating apartheid again. That's why I think it was Robin DiAngelo said, I don't have answers for biracial families,
Yes.
because they would then break. And so that's what they were doing, because they did have families that had already intermarried, right?
Yeah.
And then they had to move them. Somebody had just told me that I might pass as something, but then I wouldn't associate with certain group. Like if I had a brother or somebody who was darker than me, I wouldn't necessarily want to associate because I could literally be forced to move. Is that,
Right.
that's okay?
Right. Now, it becomes difficult when we think about tribalism, because tribalism today is usually used in a specific context, and it is in a context of hostility, tribal hostility. We all have group identity, and group identity can be racial, it can be cultural, political, religious, it can be related to sport. But we tend to have group identity along familial and genetic lines. We tend to approximate towards such categorizations. It becomes tricky um, when we have a nation of different races but similar cultural outlooks to introduce racial group identity, because it is ultimately in worldviews that people are bound together. In the past, worldviews very much tracked with specific races or specific tribes. It is no longer as clear cut as it used to be because of globalization and intermarriage and etc. What Robin DiAngelo and the woke want to create is not just tribalism. It's first of all tribalism along racial lines. They want to reintroduce cultural differences among the races. They want to racialize cultural differences with broad statements like punctuality is a white thing, it's not a black thing. The scientific method is a white thing, it's not a black thing. Logic, formal logic is white, not black. Those types of things. Certain forms of art is white versus black. So they want to reintroduce tribalization that is artificial, that's meant to socially engineer society, and it is hostile. It is meant to create friction among the races, to build resentment and envy among the races. So, especially in America, that is extremely sinister and destructive. In other countries, such as South Africa, where there are clear distinctions between races and their culture, their traditions, that's a different question, because there are clear natural differences among the between the tribes or between the races in South Africa.
I think that's really important to clarify for people because
Yes,
we are taught that if you're African, you're this. And not like most people don't even think of Africa as a continent. They just think everybody's the same. Or the same thing with
yes.
Asian people, right? If you're Asian, you're this. And many Asian groups don't even get along with each other.
It
Same
is.
thing with
It is.
Africa.
Yeah, it is so crazy. It is so crazy. I had an interview with Jenny Holland, and we spoke about that too. People talk about um, African tradition. There's no such thing as African tradition. There are hundreds, even thousands of different traditions within Africa. It is the continent with the most diverse number of languages being spoken. Just in South Africa, there are 12 official languages. One of it is South African Sign Language. So spoken languages, 11 official languages. Then there are more languages that are being spoken because, um, uh, especially in the 20th century, there were Jewish people from Eastern Europe, from Germany who came to South Africa, French, Greek, Portuguese. I grew up with Portuguese and Greek friends whose parents came to South Africa in the 40s and the 50s. The Khoi and the San, there are different Khoisan languages being spoken in South Africa. And the Khoi and the San were actually the people who were pulling on the shortest end in democracy in South Africa. They were the first peoples of the land, and none of their languages are considered official languages in South Africa. So the 11 official languages are English and Afrikaans, and then the Bantu languages.
And the Khoi and the San, they're for Americans, aren't they the people who the gods must be crazy? Where
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Yes, I was
Okay.
little when that was a great movie. Yeah, I remember that.
But when you look at them, I mean, maybe you're thinking it looks like a like black and Indian in terms of the features of the people in that movie. It looks like they've got some Indian features and
Mm,
also black like African. So
mm.
what I'm wondering, because everything tends to uh every group wants to say that they're the first indigenous peoples, right? So um a lot of people will say that the very first people who were ever created were black from Africa. But again, you have to go, and what tribe, right? Because
Exactly.
Because when you teach people resentment, and that's the big thing for me is that I want people to understand. Um, I'm interested in the history, but I really want people to understand the psychological effects of
Mm,
taking a country, like you said, had 11 official languages.
mm,
Who's most important? When you get rid of the white and then you get rid of the coloreds, because I understand there's a hierarchy, right?
mm.
And somehow the people who were originally there, which from their features again look like maybe they're black and Indian of all. I that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out. Uh, where do they originate from to have those features?
Yeah, so they were descendants of the most ancient people in Africa. They like I said, they're genetically unique. You can see it in their facial features, in their skull structures, in eye folds. They're much smaller, in their pigmentation, in their culture, the way they live. They live very much off the land. They're the Khoikhoi used to be more subsistence farmers, and they had some cattle. The San were more hunters, hunter gatherers, much more. They were much more nomadic, um, and very unique language, very unique languages. But in 1992, Mandela was released. Mandela's a complex figure. He was a terrorist. He was
Mhm.
responsible for the Church Street bombing in Pretoria, where innocent people were killed. 1994, South Africa. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and apartheid fell. We had a very difficult relationship to the system back then. As a young child, I never really related to my culture. I never really related to the governance of the time. I was a curious but a questioning child. Religion, my culture, my history, and I was raised. I grew up among. So we were obviously a white family, that had its deep roots cooperating with Africans, because my ancestors were farmers too. In fact, there is a little legend towards the east of South Africa, where my great great grandmother on my mother's side is remembered as sent by the gods. I want to explain this to you. So they had a farm, and next to the farm there was a tribe. And one day, women came to the farmhouse, and they explained to my great great grandmother that their chief was suffering. They were embroiled in some military or some combat, and he was stabbed in the rear, and and they were in distress. He was not going to survive it. And she prepared ointment, and she explained to them how to apply the ointment, and she sent them away with the ointment. A few weeks later, they came back with gifts. They said, "Our chief survived. You were sent by the gods."
Oh,
So
wow.
that is the level of complex interaction between the different tribes of Southern Africa. It wasn't as simplistic and as perversely simple as the work would want to depict it, as the evil white man in conflict with the poor victim African. No,
Right.
it was significantly more complicated. Even among the Europeans, there was competition, cooperation, uh, and conflict and trade. Among the Africans, exactly the same. There was imperialism, pillaging, taking of spoils, oppression among not only the whites, but also among the blacks. In fact, Shaka Zulu, he was the Zulu leader in the 19th century, and he was responsible for the distribution of African tribes in southern Africa, because he was a warrior king. He killed male offspring. He wanted to be king for as long as possible. He even had some of his brothers killed. And he was responsible for what is called the Mfecane or the Defecane. It was the great distribution. The great distribution, the words mean to sow seeds, the great distribution of African tribes. So the Sutus, they fled and they settled in the mountainous region of Lesotho. Others, the Matebeles, they fled and they settled in the Highveld of South Africa, and they were the Ndebele people. There are even Ndebele people in Zimbabwe. Others, the Tsongas, they fled and settled towards the northeast of South Africa. And there's another tribe. They speak the language they speak is Silozi, far towards the north, the Caprivi Strip of Namibia. And when I hear them speak, because I speak an African language, I speak Sepedi, which is Northern Sotho. When I hear people speak Silozi, I can understand, because they fled persecution and they settled far north in Namibia. So I'm just reiterating that history is significantly more nuanced and complicated than what the woke would want us to believe. So, euphoria in 1994. Apartheid fell. We have a constitutional democracy, one of the most sophisticated constitutions celebrated in the world. For the first few years, things were looking good. Economic growth between 3 and 5% until 2006, 2008, when Jacob Zuma was voted president of South Africa. Now, Jacob Zuma is an interesting fella. Whenever you look at the old pictures of the negotiations between the ANC and the National Party, you always see Cyril Ramaphosa, Mandela, and Jacob Zuma, those three. Okay, so Cyril Ramaphosa is the current president of South Africa. Obviously, Mandela was the first. So it was first Mandela, and Thabo Mbeki, and he was an intellectual. Things were good under his rule. His presidency was cut short. Kgalema Motlanthe took over.
Is
Jacob
this the
Zuma.
Rainbow Coalition? Is this during the Rainbow Coalition then?
That was during the Rainbow Coalition. That's it.
And were you
And
afraid? So, and
yes,
I have folders with quotes from Mandela, right? So because
yes.
we're presented that he was the same. That's how it's presented. And it's so interesting to me as I'm looking at history and getting ready to teach. I'm getting ready to teach ancient history. And most of the things that I find online, ancient history, are written within the last 2 years. And I know I can't really
Oh.
trust that, right?
Mhm.
And the same thing, like Mandela was presented as a saint, but we also know that he was a terrorist.
Mm.
And in what I was learning, so you were pretty young when apartheid. Were you in junior high, high school? Okay.
1994, I was 13, so it
Yeah.
was my final year in primary school.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so you were looking forward to it. You said it was euphoric. Now,
Yes.
did you also had servants, right? Didn't you tell me that? Or
Yes, we did. Yeah, we
okay.
so I and this is still the case in South Africa.
Yeah.
If you're middle class, we call them helpers. Okay,
Yeah.
we have helpers, and now because we lived on farm on a farm. My uncle and also my grandfather had a farm, um, and some of the farm folk, some of their wives would work in our home.
Hmm.
And when I was much younger, I had a nanny who raised me, and she's still alive. And sometimes when I go to South Africa, I go visit her, and I'm almost getting emotional now. There are always emotion when I see her. She has the most beautiful smile, and we just speak Sepedi, And shame my husband. He just tickles along. Sometimes they engage with him, but he doesn't speak the language. Um, there's so much love, and she calls me my child. Ngwanaka. Ngwanaka means my child. So when I was very young, she raised us, and into adolescence. So my parents got divorced. And she stayed behind working for my father, and we had someone else from the farm, because my uncle and aunt sold their farm. Someone else from their farm came and worked for us. We are very familiar with her. She was the foreman of the farm. Her name was Alfina Tobatsi, and she sadly passed away in 2014 because of collapsing healthcare. And she would have been alive had she not died. So yeah, um,
So the reason I ask this question is because I'm always interested in that in the heart connection, right? Like that is the thing,
yeah,
and where I feel, and I'm crying too, um, because I feel like they are treating people who don't have hatred, who didn't that's not part of our vocabulary to be a
mm,
hateful human being, right? And I was talking to these people, a couple from South Africa,
mm,
and they're talking to me, and they had embraced some of the shame, and they said, to be honest with you, I was racist. And I said,
mm,
okay, first off, I think there's very few people in the world who aren't racist. I think in
yeah,
my unique circumstance, the way I grew up in multiple different homes, that showed me like I have no room for that. People have way more pressing reasons on why they're evil than the color of their skin. Like that's just
mm, mm,
not the
mm,
thing.
mm,
But I'm
mm,
listening to these people and I said, "So what did you do with your racism?" And they're like, "Well, we just thought we were better." And I said, "Okay, but what did you do with that? Did you treat people did you push people around? Literally, did you push people around? Did you tell them, you're a dog face? I mean, what did you do that was racist?" And they said, "Oh no. We were always extremely respectful. Just in
yeah,
our head, we thought we were better." And my question then is, who doesn't?
precisely,
Like, this is
precisely.
a human thing. Who doesn't?
You can
What group doesn't?
you can you can look at every single nation on earth, listen to their national anthem, how great we are. That's
Right.
it. Just listen to their national anthem.
Right. Yeah.
So it is natural, it is human to want to be part of a tribe. But being part of a tribe doesn't by default mean being at war with other tribes.
Right.
That doesn't mean by default that, and in fact, multiculturalism has failed big time. And let me explain that. Psychoanalytically, psychologically, we need a group and we need possession. We need territory. That is how it is.
Yeah.
People who do not have territory feel unsafe and they can be extremely dangerous. Right.
Yeah,
So there's
that makes
got to be
sense to me.
territory. And when a nation has territory, then it's almost like the aggression, the destruction has been taken care of. What remains behind? The creative instinct. So within those territories, you see culture, music, ways of being, art, beauty, specific forms of law. Uh, um, uh, you see civilization flourishing in very unique ways. And there's got to be appreciation for that culture, for that group dynamic or group identity. Otherwise, people will not mind it. Otherwise, people will not protect it. And a culture that is unprotected is vulnerable to infiltration and destruction from hostile external forces.
So when we, as you said, listen to every country, but yet we
Mm,
make excuses and we tell our children, if you don't feel comfortable, don't sing the national anthem, sit this one out, right? So we're literally teaching our children there's nothing to be proud of here, which
Yeah.
makes no sense because, like you said, I mean, look at the Olympics. Every group is standing there. We are the best,
Mm.
right? But we're
Yes.
not supposed to. We should be ashamed.
And
And
sports is a sublimated form of warfare.
yeah,
So we engage in non-destructive, non-lethal warfare, symbolic warfare, when we play sports. And that is just fine. It is a way in which our instincts are harnessed and expressed in creative and non-destructive ways. In fact, sports only leads to enhancement of our abilities.
yeah,
And for that to succeed, there's got to be some national pride. And it is the strangest thing when I hear countries such as Canada and Australia and New Zealand with their, what do they call it? Land acknowledgements.
oh yes,
Their land
right.
acknowledgements. That's the strangest thing. As if the tribes that they found in those countries didn't have their own history of conflict and destruction
And
before the European
colonization,
arrived.
can we be clear? Colonization has always, if a group comes in and says, "Hey, we're now in power," they
They
colonized
colonized.
us.
Precisely.
And
Precisely
so,
that.
when we're doing this, you said what you talked about ways of being, right? Ways of being or ways of knowing is something we're starting to do in our schools. I was watching locally in my own little tiny district, I was
Yes.
watching a woman do a presentation and it was called "Do They Call Me What My Mother Called Me?" And I'm watching a lot of things uh, calling becoming and like taking kids who are just, American kids running around and putting them in their native garb and celebrating or centering around. And what they think is, we're just appreciating the culture. They
No,
don't
it's not as innocent
understand.
as that. No,
Yeah,
it's
can you
not as innocent.
expand?
That's very, very sinister. It's the strangest thing when an African American, so someone told me that she was asked to take traditional, it's the strangest thing, Zulu and Sotho fabrics back to her colleagues, her African American colleagues in America. Now, first of all, you can't have it both ways. You're either Sotho and you wear the shwe fabric, or you're Zulu and you wear that fabric. But this is artificial cultural appropriation.
Pan-Africanism, right?
It's Pan-Africanism,
Pan-Africanism.
but it is hostile. It is not authentic. It is meant to be. It is meant to incite unnecessary racial resentment among groupings, among races in
Right.
Africa. It is the strangest thing when an African American, and I'm not referring to you now because I've never encountered that with you. Sometimes African Americans who are very woke would just tell you, you're just a white man, you're just a racist white man. And I've had this online discussion with someone. I said, okay, let's let's compare notes. I asked her, what's your name? And she gave me her name. Very English name. So do you have an African name? No. Oh, what food did you grow up on? No, American food. That's interesting. What languages do you speak? American and some French. That's interesting. Any African languages? No. Are you a believer? Yes. What? Roman Catholic. Okay, that's interesting. Ever participated in traditional African music, traditional African ritual? No. All right. You speak any African language? No. That's interesting. Your worldview. What is your worldview? No, it's Western because I'm colonized. Okay, that's interesting. I said, you know what, let me tell you something. African women, traditional African women, called me their child. The second nanny that I referred to, her own child died after going to an initiation school, and she adopted myself and my brother as her own children. I grew up on African food. I grew up learning, singing African church songs. I speak African languages. I received an African title from Africans themselves. I participated in African rituals. I did pathlas. Pathlas is a grave ritual where you ask for guidance from the deceased person. All those this white man have engaged in. And I concluded saying, okay,
All right. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
that's okay. And I said, the only difference between myself and you is skin color. But other than that, it seems to me like I'm more African than you are. And that is the point. It is not as simple as just putting on garb and then declare yourself traditional. That is an abuse. That just shows the lack of respect
It's cultural
wokeness
appropriation.
has. Cultural appropriation, the utter lack of respect wokeness has for these deep, precious traditions that people have built and nurtured over millennia.
Yeah. What I'm watching here with the Native American situation is you're taking kids who don't care. And I don't mean that in a callous way. I mean they're just Americans. And
Innocent.
it's okay to be just Americans. We don't have
Yes.
to be ashamed of what we are.
Mm.
And I'm probably on my father's side. I don't know, but I'm probably only first generation American. Knowing what I know about his family, I'm probably first generation American, but my mother was American, so
I
I'm
see.
American, right? Um, but there's a difference. There's a difference between appreciation. So, like, they'll bring people in and like do powwows and have camps of learn to appreciate the culture and the history. I don't I don't see that as being nefarious. Please clarify if I'm wrong. But what they'll also do is they'll send like young teachers in to teach them
Mm.
what they don't know because nobody says, "Hey, you're taking Marxism 101." Because most of our teachers would say, "Oh, I'm not ever going to do that." But they're teaching them that they're oppressed. And granted, they live on reservations. They don't have a lot, but they're not teaching them how they got there. They don't have the conversations that somebody sold you out and they're living in the big mansion while you're living in these really awful trailer parks and you guys happen to have the same color of skin. And that I think takes us back to 2008 because
Mm.
all of these people who were in power, they enriched themselves. And
Mm.
from what I understand, there are people who say that life for many was better, and I'm talking about Black people here.
Yes.
Life for many was better under apartheid.
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
expand on that? Because I don't think most Americans, we only know what we hear in a TikTok video.
Yeah. I recently listened to someone who spoke. It was on I think it was on a TV show or something, and he said, there was a lot bad and wrong in South Africa under apartheid. And this was an elderly black person who spoke, respected, because I think he was a businessman. And he said the judiciary was functioning. He said you went to a hospital, there was a bed available for you. There were doctors on call and nurses available. There was medicine. I became emotional because my nanny, my African mother, died in 2014 because she had pneumonia, and I know that rural hospital did not have medicine. That's why she died. Everything post apartheid, actually post 2008, declined rapidly. It is so dangerous to go to a state hospital today in South Africa. So the health system is collapsing. Infrastructure is crumbling. The police system is collapsing. So under the most oppressive regime Southern Africa ever had, crime stats were the lowest. significantly lower than they are today. Significant. It's a fraction of the crime stats today. The last court in 2004, in 2024, last year, the rate of rapes in South Africa was 40,000. Okay, so it's a population of 60 million. 40,000, and only about 3% of those are reported at the police. It's a violent. It's such a destructive and deteriorating society currently. Everything is deteriorating because what Jacob Zuma and his cronies did was, and this is Soviet-style Marxism, race Marxism. So clever.
And he
So in the
went there.
70s.
He went
So,
to Russia. And
yes, in the 70s.
Yeah.
In the 70s, he was trained by the Soviets, and he knew for you to be in power, you had to deploy loyalists at every single level of government, from municipalities right up to parliament. You appoint loyalists, and this is the trick when it comes to race-based laws. You can play both games. You can do the you can do the imperialistic, the colonizing, the ethnic cleansing trick by introducing or by flooding different echelons of government with people of a certain race, politically connected with a certain agenda, while hiding behind this is transformation. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. That pivoting, it's so easy to be a double agent and to be pivoting between those two things. So it was very, very easy for Jacob Zuma to be fronting legislation, while what he was actually doing was he was appointing cadres, CADRE, cadres in I think that's what you call it in America.
Yes.
At every level of government, political loyalists, corrupt to the core. So we have a value issue. They're corrupt. In other words, a value issue is I see something is this, but I know it ought not to be this. It ought to be that. So that value system of what our ideals look like. Our value system in South Africa changed after 2008, in that the government was seen as a cow that could be hollowed out and pilfered for political and personal gain. So well-connected families, politically connected families that were wealthy to begin with. So even though they said, yes, we need to involve previously disadvantaged people, it looked like they were previously disadvantaged people because disadvantage was only measured according to race as opposed to actual class.
Can we hit that? Previously disadvantaged. In other words, no longer disadvantaged, but now they're called previously disadvantaged.
Previously disadvantaged, yes.
And that is an interesting thing because they are admitting that it stopped. Like,
yes,
we're no longer in that category, but we still need to be we still need to be taken care of. We still need to be, things still need to measure out. I think that's interesting.
Enough. That's true, but still, because of apartheid, because of the poverty, especially black people who did not participate in the economy as fully as they could have or should have, subsequent generations were very, very poor.
Yes.
So to break that, they had to be pulled into the economy.
But that was happening before with the Rainbow Coalition.
That's true. But it was so easy now to hide behind that agenda, the Rainbow Coalition agenda of introducing black people into the economy. It was so easy to hide behind it, while in reality they were appointing very well connected, very rich black people in governing positions.
They were doing this during the Rainbow Coalition?
There was some of it happening there was some of that happening during that time too, but it wasn't as clearly an articulated mission as the National Democratic Revolution. As that was what Jacob Zuma introduced, the National Democratic Revolution, NDR.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one yet.
So so we had a values issue, and there was the corruption, but then also qualifications, because people were connected as opposed to well qualified for these positions. They were appointed, and the necessary consequence, both because of kleptocracy, but as well as ineptocracy, because they were so inept. Many state-owned enterprises just collapsed. Electricity provision, like I said, water treatment, infrastructure, roads, railways. We had the most connected with the most intricate railway system in South Africa, more than the whole of Africa combined. In South Africa, it's not functioning. Our ports not functioning. We had a state-owned airways, South African Airways, totally collapsed because Jacob Zuma appointed these inept, corrupt officials, and especially this one family called the Gupta family. And they ensured that kickbacks would be channeled back to politically connected people. And the public protector Thuli Madonsela back in the day, she compiled the State of Capture report, and Jacob Zuma was and also the Zondo Commission. It was an inquiry into the extent of state capture, and it crippled South Africa. So such that the growth is current today, the growth will not be as high, but up until 2024, the growth was only 1%, while so economic growth 1%, population growth 2%. So there's for 17 years there's been a year-on-year shrinking of our economy.
So what do they expect to do when there's nothing left of their country?
Who's the they?
The elites, those
They don't see
politically
it.
connected families,
The
they just
you
squander.
you're thinking like a well-civilized Christian.
Okay.
They're not thinking like that.
Okay.
They're not thinking like that. They want to hollow
Okay.
out as much as they can. They want to create a bigger divide between the haves and the have-nots, because the more people are the more desperate people are, the more easily they can be
Controlled.
intimidated, controlled, but the more easily they can use resentment and envy to get people to behave the way these elites want them to behave. And one of the ways in which they want people to behave is to forever think that their suffering is due to the white man. The white people that are still around, we're only 7 to 8% of South Africa in terms of population, because of apartheid, because of the white man, and because of colonization. Colonization built South Africa. A few years ago, when we came to Ireland, there was an American woman. She was of Indian descent, and she was, she used to talk before she thought, and very, thoughtlessly, she would say, "You know what? Whenever we visit South Africa, it doesn't feel to us like we're in Africa." Well, it speaks for itself, because South Africa was developed by the European. Okay, it
Right.
is what it is, and it's no statement of the dignity of African people, not at all. I'm just commenting on what colonization did because of the technology the Europeans brought. It
Well,
just is what it is.
it also brought some wisdom. Let's stop sacrificing people. I mean,
That's true, and
there's things that, yeah.
I don't think there was human sacrifice. There was no human sacrifice in the rituals in Southern Africa. They
Oh,
would
never.
sacrifice. No,
Okay.
No. And I think in Africa they would sacrifice goats and sheep and cattle and even
Okay.
chickens, but there was never human sacrifice in Southern Africa.
Okay, then I'm gonna have to correct it just for the audience. I know that in America there
As
was.
far as I
I
know.
mean,
Yes,
right.
yeah.
So
So in
so
America,
my
especially in
point,
Mesoamerica.
right. So my argument is that colonization, like I always teach my students, everything's complicated. There's always more
Mm,
than one side to the story. There's an understanding on why people would say we want to be treated better or look across the road and go, wow, they've got more than I do. That's
mm,
that I can understand that. When it comes to the point of taking great pleasure in torturing people, when it comes to the point of sexually assaulting 2-year-old children, putting them in boiling water till their skin comes off, you have to be taught to hate to that level.
yes.
So, what I'm wondering about is that so apartheid ends, everybody's euphoric. You've got the Rainbow Coalition, things seem pretty good. How fast did it turn? Because it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that DEI is the only, South Africa is the natural conclusion of where DEI in everything goes. So
Yes.
when did
Yes.
schools change? When did they start to look at their,
So
resentful of
it
their
was
other students? Go ahead.
yes, it was a gradual tightening of the noose. So year after year, legislation came out, and um, and subsequent versions of legislation came out that was meant to constrict white people's access and flourishing in South Africa economically, whereas they wanted to enhance black people's participation in it. And the way they went about it wasn't wise. In that, for instance, initially, if you wanted to have dealings with the government, you had to prove that 30% of the company that you started belonged to a black person. So that black person would have done nothing. So initially, what some of the white people did was they gave 30% to the helpers in the home. They said, well, this is just a logical. It just makes sense to me. I'm the expert of my company. And you know what? When one day when I sell my company, 30% will go to her because she's been so good for us, and her children will be taken care of. So that was initially what happened. And then government said, no, 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 you can't. It has to be someone who's part of your business. You have to bring them in as a business partner. It can't just be the helper in your house. And they expanded they call it black economic empowerment. They expanded the
Right.
black economic empowerment to broad-based black economic empowerment, where there were levels of of uh, portions of your of how can I put it? The greater the level of the proportion belonging to black people, the higher up your status of black economic empowerment was. You'd get BEE certificates too. So currently, the top tier would be one in which 51% of a business would belong to not only a black person, but a black person that the government chooses. So again, the cadre deployment. It has to be someone who's a politically connected loyalist to the ANC. They're also proposing legislation now that says if you have a company, a private company, whether you're doing business with government or not, a private company, we tell you the proportion of of the race and sex distribution of appointees in your business. We tell you. And if you don't meet those targets, you will have to explain to us at the risk of criminal of being criminally charged for doing that. So we see race Marxism, Soviet style race Marxism, gradually, incrementally being introduced in South Africa while the economy is contracting.
Right.
But that is what ideology does. That is what ideology is not connected to reality. Ideology is doctrine.
It's a
Because it's
new
not correct.
religion.
It's a new
It's
religion. And psychologically, what ideology does is it creates the realm of illusion. And in illusion, the imaginary prevails. And when I imagine my utopia, and my doctrine tells me that this is what you're supposed to do, and it can be extremely hard to rip a person out of that state of illusion. So the doctrine functions as a virus, as a mind virus. It captures the mind, and the the imaginary realm where it projects you into supplies you with so much narcissistic pleasure that it can be extremely difficult for you to renounce that narcissistic pleasure, especially in groups. And what I mean by groups, political groups, racial groups, when races are fired up and they see a target, and within this ideology, individuals are seen as tokens of a group. So they're not
right.
being treated as individuals anymore. They're
Mhm.
token representatives of a group. And when our ideology says the past was unfair, the past was unjust, what happens is in the here and the now, we're enacting past conflicts. The only difference is in reality, our targets are innocent people. But in fantasy, in illusion, they are past villains, and we are past victims. So we're settling past scores in the here and the now, and that is what's making it so evil, where people are actually engaging in a type of gradual racial demoralization,
Right.
cultural and ethnic cleansing. In fact, Genocide Watch has placed South Africa at level 6 of a 10-step genocide
Do you
process.
know those numbers of the thing? I've definitely heard it before, but if you have it right off the top of your head, um, I'm just trying to think. But one of the things, if you're looking at that, um,
I'm looking at, I'm
that
finding them
people need
now.
to understand is, again, when I was looking at history projects for learning about history, so much of it will say reimagine, reimagine, reimagine. In other words,
Hmm.
get rid of reality and rethink the vision that we want you to of
Hmm.
what happened in history. And I think that's so important to understand. They don't want you rooted in truth. They want
Yes,
you rooted in emotion.
right. Reimagine. Um, why is it necessary to reimagine? You see, there's such a lack of gratitude.
Yes.
There's such a
So
lack of gratitude, and the one thing that competes with gratitude is envy and resentment. So they boost racial envy and resentment. People, I don't understand this. Nowhere else in the world are people enjoying the freedoms, the flourishing, the prosperity than in America. And when you talk to some of these woke Americans, you would imagine that they're the most miserable people on earth. The most miserable people. Send them to Somalia so that they can appreciate misery. Send them to the DRC. Send
we
them
have
to
we have a Somalian representative
Bangladesh.
who constantly talks about how horrible America is. But we
Yes.
have a Somalian, Elon Omar, and you just sit there
Oh,
going,
yeah,
then why did you come here? But you came here to
precisely.
you came here to gut and to glean.
To gut
And
and to glean, yes.
yeah,
Let me tell you, this is purely psychological. And when you're caught up in the illusion, everything else is secondary to the illusion. Everything else, including reality,
so we
including
made people
reality.
sick. I mean, we literally made people sick. And I think a huge part of it, again, when you go into things like TikTok and other social media
Mm.
platforms, they're designed by people who want to control. They're designed by people who really have a disdain for so many of us. And those are the same people who provide the Chromebooks for our students, where
Mm.
you can access absolutely anything. And almost every narrative is one of oppression. So you said,
Yes.
why would they do that? Well, I in the summertime especially, I go to different, like, camps, and I tell the stories of Harriet Tubman and Elizabeth Freeman, and people are like, "Oh, you're keeping DEI alive." No, I'm not. I'm telling their real stories from historical documents, and the reason that I tell them is because somebody else will tell them a reimagined story. They will
Mm.
tell them, Elizabeth Freeman didn't like the Sedgwicks. No, they called her Mum Bet because they thought of her as a good
Mm.
mother, because people have
Yes.
always been, good. But
Yes.
they will take those stories and twist them so that
Yes.
everything is constantly feeding our children a glass of resentment. Just keep on
Right.
drinking, you know?
Right. And that was the same in South Africa too, especially the history syllabuses in primary and secondary school. Same story. It was also
When?
framed in such a way.
When did
Well,
it
it was
start?
it came gradually after 1994 because let me think, 1994. When I was in high school, they still taught us old history, perhaps in the 2000s. So after I'd left school,
I
they
wonder if it's
started.
2008. Barack Obama comes into power,
Entirely, it's
right?
entirely possible. Mm,
So
it's
Jacob
entirely
Zuma comes
possible.
into power, Barack Obama,
Yeah.
England starts teaching an anti-Western.
Mm,
So do that math, and we're about 20 years into this stuff, or
mm, mm.
specifically 2008. We are 16 years into this stuff, right? And
I remember one person. He's an American. He's an African American, and he came to South Africa, and there was this one video that I saw of him, and they took a drive past Knysna. Now Knysna is in the Southern Cape. It used to be a it's a very unique, in terms of in terms of the natural biome, it's a very unique region. It's stunningly beautiful. There's a forest too. In fact, Circles in the Forest is a translated book, beautifully written, and I recommend it, by Dalian Matia, of a family and their relationship with nature, especially the elephants in the Knysna forest. So this man takes this road trip, and they look and he looks at the mansions, and he says, all these mansions belong to white people. This is unfair. This should be given to black people. And he was an envoy of he was part of the Obama administration, and he was assigned to South Africa. And just from that short video clip, I realized that this person has had a whole agenda, a whole toxifying agenda for coming to South Africa, and everything was infiltrated by
yes,
critical race theory and all the critical theories to the max in South Africa. But I want to, the stages of genocide. First,
yes.
classification. So racial classification, that's just fine. Second, symbolization. So how they're depicted, how they're symbolized as good or bad. Discrimination. Fourth, dehumanization. Fifth, organization.
Can you
And
stop on
sixth
fourth
is,
for a moment? Oh, go ahead.
yes,
Go ahead.
we're at number
Dehumanization.
six.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
We're at number six, polarization. So we
Okay.
are 3 steps away from extermination, because number seven is preparation, eight is persecution, and then nine is extermination, 10 is denial. So
Seems
we're
to
at
me
number
like you're in
six.
seems to me like you're in you've got some of 7 and 8, and that's what I was gonna actually say, is that when I was on this call with this group that specifically values, I don't wanna say the name because I know people who are involved with it, but this group specifically values having people come to the table and have conversations.
Mm,
And when it came to South Africa, they laughed. about the thing. They said it's nothing but land. They were super dismissive of, I said, kill the Boer, kill the farmer. Seriously? And they're like, that's just tribal. That's the way they talk. And the majority of them
Yeah.
were white liberals. There was one woman who was Mexican, and she just felt that her problem should be, or I shouldn't say Mexican, Latin. And she felt that her issues should be forefront, right? Centering around some at
Mm,
the exclusion of others, which is
mm,
what happens here. And when we tried, it was just me and a friend on the call that were stood from our point of view. We tried to usher in compassion. One of the first things they said is, if they don't like it, they shouldn't go to America. They should go back where they're from. And that one made me like got a little upset, got a little heated
mm.
because I just thought, wow, if someone would tell you or me to go back where we're from, it would go berserk. But yet, because this person's white, you and this person was from South Africa, um, appeared to be Asian. But I just thought, first off, if you are Asian, you're colonizing right now a lot of Africa. So there's that's what's happening. If we're going to
Yeah.
classify people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But also just the dismissiveness, the
Yeah.
saying, these killing of these people, well, murders happen. And
No, it's not as simple as that. And yet, now I'm getting fired up because, again, yet another area of simplification, a reduction to its absurd level. 1,000 people can commit the same kind of crime, and there could be 1,000 different motivations for it. Okay, just because South Africa is violent doesn't mean the motivation for violence is always the same in every instance. There's violence in the Cape Flats. The motivation is gang related. There's there is gender-based violence. There is motivation, and then there is violence towards white South African farmers. And we know what the motivation is for many of those killings. So since 1994 to 2025, there have been more than 4,000 farm murders in South Africa. 4,000. Now, 4,000 farm murders, 30,000 farmers. In America, there are 3 million farmers. So if you do the math, the number of murders in South Africa would be the equivalent number of almost 500,000 being murdered if we lived in America. If we take the proportion,
right,
almost half, more than 400,000. Don't you think there would have been an outcry in America by now if there was such a, such a clear trend
I
of
would like to
murders?
say there would be, but
It,
at the same time,
no,
we have a crisis of cowardice here.
right. Now,
If it's a white person,
it
it's
it is it is 2 to 3 times as it's 2 to 3 times more dangerous than a policeman to be a farmer. Two
yeah,
to three times more dangerous than a policeman to be a farmer, and to be a policeman is twice as dangerous than compared to being a citizen. So it just shows you the danger. It's so because farmers are isolated. They find themselves in remote regions. The police system has collapsed in South Africa. These farm attacks and murders are extremely cruel. More than 20% involves the most
torture.
brutal torture. I say every few days, something of October 7th happens to an unfortunate family in South Africa. Few weeks, I was so bothered by this. Few weeks ago, there was a family attacked towards the north of South Africa. Young family, father, 20-year-old son, 17-year-old daughter. 20-year-old son Think about that. He's on the launching pad of his life. He was shot in the head, dead. Parents died. The daughter was taken to a room where she was repeatedly raped.
Yep.
Mother, father beaten and tortured.
Yep.
There's so much hatred in something like that. And it's the only crime that gets encouraged to be committed
That's why.
by
So
politicians.
I'm looking
And
at your list. Yes,
the
go ahead.
second thing, when you look at social media comments,
Yeah,
you see how even the common man celebrates such
I
torture.
know. I know.
It's
So,
it's unbelievable. So those liberal, woke white women, let
yeah,
them fester, let them boil in their vitriol and in their self-destructive, toxic envy. Hand them over. Hand them over to whichever dark force is behind them. Let that dark force take care of them.
unfortunately, so many of them are in education.
Yes. And they're
So,
toxifying the minds of so many young people. Innocent, innocent, kind young people who do not live in this world that they this resentment-based world that they're trying to create. They're being corrupted by those woke white women.
yeah.
That's so sad.
So now I'm not going to be able to see my list, but I pulled up the
It's
same list and okay. Um, so preparation. Well, I want to go
mm,
into preparation is in South Africa. I just want to draw this parallel between what we see here and what's already gone on there. Preparation
mm,
there is stadiums filled with people with red berets chanting and screaming and
mm,
getting to this cult like in place of you know, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, just
that
loudly
frenzy.
screaming, non-stopping it, the frenzy, exactly. And you know what the frenzy
Mm,
reminds me of is when I don't know if it was Adolf Hitler or if it was another
yeah, it was
dictator,
Adolf Hitler.
but
Yeah,
they made him clap,
same frenzy.
and they were like the first
Yes,
person who doesn't clap, we shoot, right?
yes.
And so the same thing getting that frenzy up. Now,
Mm,
preparation here, where we're at here, is just social and emotional learning, telling kids to be able to choose their disruptive strategy by the time they're in
disruptive.
eighth grade. Okay. And now we have we have California burning, we have riots all over the place, and even in my little red state of Utah, there are over 8 planned protests for the next 4 days. Where'd it come from? Where did it come from?
Funded.
Well, not only
Mm.
is it funded, but it's also education. It's
Why do they
also
want to
education.
disrupt? Why do they want to disrupt?
So the resentment here tends to come
Yes.
again, I'm in Utah, right? The resentment
Mm,
here tends to come from people who have left the church. Maybe they've left the church because they're homosexual. Maybe they
mm.
have left the church. But then there's also a lot within the church of embracing not homosexuality, that's a part of it, but embracing queerness. They want to queer the church. That is happening. And they don't understand that the whole point of queering is Marxism. They don't understand it. They'll say, I'm not a Marx. I've never read Marx. And you're like, it doesn't
Mm,
matter if you've read something. The culture is still there. These people all over in 2008, suddenly Obama's going to South Africa. Suddenly he's
mm,
sending an envoy. These things are
mm.
happening. Maduro's coming into, is it Maduro who came into power at that time?
Oh, in
All of these
Venezuela.
things.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm thinking of Jacob Maduro. Do I have his name wrong? Jacob
Jacob
Maduro?
Zuma.
Oh, sorry, Jacob Zuma. Okay, so
Zuma.
yeah, so
Yeah,
he's coming into power. All of these things. So I just want to go down that list again. So let's start
yeah.
classification. Classification, well, when we're
Yes,
telling our children to identify by their points of intersectionality, we are classifying them.
yes,
That we just
yes,
are.
yes.
Symbolization. when we're
Yes.
telling our kids what flags to put up, what
Yeah. Not
clothes
only
to
that.
wear.
So symbolization means
Yes.
assigning moral meaning to the class to the categories. So
Okay.
so moral meaning that refers to whether a person is morally
MAGA is
guilty.
evil, right? MAGA is
Yes,
evil. That would be
right.
classification or symbolization.
Symbolization. So when you're black and gay and whatever, then you're a
Yes.
victim. Then you're innocent.
Okay. So that's
So
different than
right.
classification.
No,
Classification is
that
just putting you into your group.
groups.
Yes?
Symbolization
Okay.
is assigning guilt or innocence based on that classification.
Discrimination is saying that you get to hate the people who aren't, you get to hate the people that you've classified as evil or that you've put
And
this.
also affirmative action, and
So,
almost affirmative action. So you promote the innocent victim and you oppress and restrict the successful oppressor, Asians and
right,
whites and men. That's
right.
discrimination,
So let's
institutionalized
take that
discrimination.
as schools. Take that in
Yes.
schools. We're getting rid
Universities.
of, we're pushing equity-based education, right?
Hmm.
So we're pushing
Hmm.
equity-based education, which has been proven to lower. Now let's look at South Africa. South Africa was thriving, right?
Yes.
You had
Yes.
you were like the gem of Africa for a while.
Absolutely.
Understanding, right? And now
Absolutely. We were.
you're a lot of it's a crap hole.
We're crumbling. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, it just takes
Those woke white women, send them to Hillbrow, Johannesburg, or Sunnyside, Pretoria.
right,
Let's see how they let's see how well they would survive the queered space of those two areas. Let's see how well they would survive.
right. They wouldn't.
No,
They
but they
wouldn't. I mean,
wouldn't. They would no, they wouldn't. They'd much rather stay in their little ivory towers, caught up in their
bingo.
illusion, and dictate to others how they should and should not live without having skin in the game.
These so many times are women who are married to very successful men who are
Mm,
bored and they feel
mm,
guilty because they can go shopping whenever they want to, and they their white saviorism, they wear and they
mm.
parade it, and here it's, we are the kindest, we are the most enlightened and the most, we will empower you to fall. That's what they're doing, is they're empowering to fall.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
dehumanization, oh yeah, when they
Oh yes. Mm.
pretend you don't even exist, they just look right past you, or they say things like, I'd rather sit on this person than talk to them.
Or to say, yeah, but you deserve
Yes.
it. This and that
Oh,
happened to
oh,
me.
right.
Yes. So you
Oh,
go to a police
jeez.
station. This and that happened to me. So ah, you're fine. You're white. You're rich. Ah, you're fine.
Wow. Wow.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah, you deserve it, exactly. So
you deserve
let's
it.
take a look
Mm.
at, I mean, specifically Israel. Those Jewish kids. We've got Jewish kids here who have fled the college and went to look for help, like 7 of
Yeah,
them. Fled a
yeah.
college and went to look for help. And people are just like, they deserve it.
And
And I'm like, you are
how on
literally calling for the genocide of your fellow classmates. So,
and think about
okay,
this. Jews tend to be very successful, and I
yes,
think it was Jordan Peterson who said it. There's nothing as annoying than a successful minority.
yeah. Well,
Nothing
the
as annoying.
crazy thing is that educationally, a lot of Jewish people are liberals. So same they think the exact same ways. They fight for the exact same causes. And
Right?
I mean, I've got friends who just, well, former friends who were super close to me until, Donald Trump. And and I sit there going, wait a second, you're okay with guns being rounded up? Do you not know your own history? That's
It is. I
so
think the October 7th was a great disillusionment to many liberal Jews.
it was, but for my friends, we're talking far. For my friends, they were out doing things to help Palestine.
Oh
And
wow.
they're the kind of people who would say Jews are always being attacked. And I don't know if it's changed for them because I haven't talked to them for a while.
Mm.
But because I see the parallel. I see South Africa literally as, holy cow, they arranged this. They
We're so ahead of the
arranged
curve.
failure. And
Mm,
I would say if a person wants to be calm, they could say that you guys are that South Africa is 10 years ahead of us. But I don't
yes.
think that we're in a it's going too rapidly. Okay. We now are right now, our school boards in Utah are discussing bringing in equitable math. We already
Oh,
have
please.
we already have restorative justice. We already have people in rural towns going, why the heck is there no discipline in our schools?
So let me
There
explain this to you. Equitable math. We did that in South Africa too. So when I was at school, there were three levels of math. Math was a subject that you had to take, so it was a compulsory subject. Afrikaans, English, so two languages, and math. And there were three levels because some people do not have the mathematical proficiency, and we appreciate that. So there was high level, standard level, and lower level. But it was algebra, it was calculus, it was geometry, trigonometry, etc. at three levels. And then they got rid of the lower level and only had standard grade and higher grade. And then maybe it was after 2008 they introduced just normal math. Okay, so it would be the normal math. It would be algebra, trigonometry, geometry, and calculus. But then they had math literacy. Very, very simple day-to-day little calculations, word sums. It was such an utter failure because people would graduate with math literacy and they had such a profound deficiency in their mathematical understanding of things that many of them were unemployable.
I have a question. Did their math literacy, because ours does, did it include social justice? Because now a story problem, really, like a story problem is no longer 2 plus
Oh
2 equals
yeah?
4. It's there
Oh,
are
it
3
sounds
white
like
people in the
yeah.
room.
It sounds like Third Reich Germany. There are five Jews walking in the street. Those five Jews have stolen from 10 Germans 10 marken each. How much money did those five Jews steal from the
Bingo.
German?
That was already there? Was that already there?
No, we're in the Third Reich.
Yes? Were
In
they
in
really
in
teaching
in,
math
in
like that?
yes, 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 yes. In Germany
Is
before Adolf.
can
Yes.
can I get an ex
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any example? Because I would love to pair that with I showed my son a problem and he goes, "Oh, so the easiest way to say it is white equals greater than or black equals greater
So
than white
all you need to do is Google examples, anti-Semitic examples
of
in
math."
of
Oh
German
my
schools. Anti-Semitic.
gosh.
Yes, exactly,
So
exactly.
that's what I've said is that they're repeating
Mm.
it is not like people will say, "Oh, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes." I'm like, "Nope,
But
not in these cases." It is
of
they're
course,
they're
history does.
choosing the worst, most disgusting things. And
Mm.
so and it's the same thing, Khan Academy. A lot of people think Khan Academy is super trustworthy, right? But Khan Academy will, so some of the kids opted out of a test, and what they instead were doing a Khan Academy example, and the Khan Academy was, understanding dictatorship, had the Marxist fist. Everything was
Mm.
in red that was bad, and then it said, a dictator, and then it was like compared to January 6th. Right? So
Mm.
it's just this is
Oh, I
not
see how
even
they frame
hiding
it.
it. They're
Yeah.
specifically framing every lesson like this. Not every, but many lessons like this. This
So these people have carte blanche, and I'm going to say this again. These people have carte blanche to teach the most heinous, destructive, resentment based things to innocent children by using one phrase, and that is social justice.
Yeah.
Social justice justifies these people to teach anything and everything, however heinous these teachings might be.
And
That
you
is how
guys took,
perverse. That is how perverse it is. So remember, Marxism is a philosophical sophistication of envy and resentment. And envy says, if I can't have what you have, then neither of us will have it. I will
right,
destroy what you have just so neither of us will have it. That is Marxism. That's envy sophisticated in a very elaborate philosophy. And even Marx's father said, you grew up in such a wealthy family. What happened to you? Get a real job. What is this envy all about? His father wrote to him. He was a useless person.
yes,
Marx was a useless person. He was a bad husband and a horrible father. Useless.
agreed. Agreed 100%. The other
Right.
one that South Africa did was democracy is our strength, right?
Yes, so, but that is also a certain understanding of democracy. It's a social race Marxist type democracy where they again where they introduce all these measures to socially engineer society and then to call it democracy.
Well, I mean, pure democracy. This is the example of pure democracy. That's why I am always clarifying the constitutional republic. But pure democracy is a matter of it's mob rule. It always reduces to mob rule.
And that's it. And you trust that the mob's judgment is accurate.
And it's,
Right.
I mean, even with the fall of Athens, it was once they realized they could use emotion, it game
Yes.
over.
Right.
Game over.
It was so interesting. In ninth grade, we read Animal Farm, and it was quite
Yes.
interesting to see the parallels. And one of the things that there are so many different parallels. You can just try this out. Go onto ChatGPT and tell the machine draw parallels between
Oh,
Orwell's Animal Farm and South Africa as a failed state. You'll be astonished. And one of the things is, after the pigs took over, they had those 10 commandments. It was so stunning. It was towards the end of the book. And it was many, many years ago that I read it. Towards the end of the book, you can almost pick up the demoralization, almost like, you need to start making peace with the fact that you're about to die. There's this surrender, this demoralization. And many of these animals could no longer even remember those 10 commandments. And this is what happens in South Africa too. Under apartheid, they were very, very clear on where the apartheid system failed people. Very, very clear. And people had a conscience, and those failures struck at their conscience, struck at their guilt. And on the basis of that, they surrendered power. Today, things are horribly worse, 10 times worse in many, many respects than under apartheid. The failures of just general public is so immense. Do you think those people who pointed fingers at the apartheid system would hold themselves to the same standard? Not even close. Not even close. Once they're in power, they violate the same condemnations they hurled at their previous enemies. They brought them into power. They violate those same rules.
I think that when you become resentful, like to your core, it
Mm.
really is kind of written all over you. When I look at pictures of the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, and
Zuma.
yeah, when I look at them, their faces look like there's no goodness to them. That's honestly what I see when I look at their eyes. I'm
Yeah.
like, these are the kind of people, and I feel that way. And I've never felt this way before. Like, when you said demoralized, I was talking to some people yesterday and they're like, it is so hard to not be demoralized. It is so hard to not go, we're losing. We're losing and they're gaining ground and they're gaining ground. But their souls, I think, are so ugly that it is a distraction. I mean it is it's a warning in itself when
Yes.
you see that. And I mean, for me, I can't be demoralized because I look at innocent children. There's a reason I teach.
Yes.
I want to see their faces and to go, I keep going for you and you and you and you and of course him,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Like,
mm,
this is why we don't stop in what we do. But
mm. I
I
want to
mean
say something else.
oh, go ahead. Yes. Go ahead.
So I said Marxism is a philosophical sophistication of envy. Queer theory is a philosophical sophistication of perversion.
And I think that's really important. If you I mean, you already said you
Because,
have a husband, you
yes,
know.
yes,
So, can you explain that for anyone who might stumble across this conversation?
queer is
We
not the same as homosexual. It's not the same as homosexual. Queer is a philosophy that says whatever category exists, you enviously destroy that category, no matter what it is. So in psychology, the mother gratifies and the father says no, but you can. What I mean by that is, what I mean by that is the father introduces rules. Rules say no. It's no longer on the basis of this universe between you and mom that you will proceed. These are external rules, but you can gain mastery over these rules. So the father restrains instincts, he structures the universe, but he encourages the child to gain mastery over those restrictions. Queer theory says, how dare you? My infant maternal universe will prevail. I will destroy any structure, frame, any measure that you apply to me that that deprives me of ultimate gratification. I will destroy it. And that is the perverse instinct. Now, people would say, yes, but you're gay, etc., etc. Yes, by all means, homosexuality can be perverse. But when you are in a committed relationship, there is already a no. There is already a commitment, and I deprive myself of promiscuity. There is already a prioritizing of another over my own needs. So you see in the arrangement there is already a paternal arrangement as opposed to just a purely gratification based maternal arrangement. And this disruption is perverse because this disruption says, what deprives me of my unbridled gratification? Societally, what
right.
deprives me of my unbridled gratification? I will disrupt that. Whereas society, civilization can only be called civilization in a paternal universe. A maternal universe does not create civilization. Because civilization is built on the appreciation that we have nature to be protected against, and we have relational interactions to be regulated. To be regulated. And regulation is no longer maternal. Regulation means you cannot do this for the greater good. For the greater good. There's something greater than you. You little narcissist. In the maternal universe, you're the center of the universe. In a
Right.
civilization, you're not the center of the universe. In a civilization, there are arrangements, and you benefit from those arrangements, but your benefit is limited because other people benefit fairly too. So and you recognize civilization because not only is there law and order, there's also, so law and order is gratification depriving.
Mhm.
There's also beauty.
Mhm.
So there's this, the art, science is the harnessing of the instincts to things, to something valuable and creative. That's paternal, all right? That's more a cooperation between the maternal and the paternal, okay? And then there's also cleanliness. Cleanliness is also a sign of civilization, that I need to put in effort to be clean as opposed to just doing nothing and expecting me to survive.
Right? It's
Okay,
savage. It's savagery versus, well, that's the opposite, right? And
that's it. It's a feral savage state versus a sophisticated civilized state. And disruption, queer theory. If you want to see the results of queer theory and unmediated gratification, just go to downtown LA. There is
Portland, yeah.
prostitution, there is human trafficking, there's filth, no law and order, there's vandalism, so there's no beauty, there's
Right.
drug addiction, there's crime. Psychoanalytically, we call that the anal sadistic universe. So, what queer theory wants to achieve, and these resentful woke white women want to achieve, whether they realize it or not, is to establish an anal sadistic universe where no one is more superior, more sophisticated, more advanced than another. The ultimate value of the anal sadistic universe, the ultimate value of queer theory is sacrilege.
Right.
Sacrilege, okay? They want to disrupt. Yes,
Right.
but our culture is a developed high culture. I don't care. The queer theorists would say, I don't care. It deprives me of my unmediated gratification, and that is why I shall violate what you consider to be sacred. And I'm prepared to sneak into and to infiltrate the church. I will infiltrate the church, and I will erect the disgusting thing causing desolation in the sanctuary, in the most holy. That's a prophecy, by the way. I will erect the disgusting thing causing desolation in the sanctuary.
So
Luke 21.
what I often say is that in this organization that I run, right?
Mm,
There's this battle, two branches of the same tree. You've got the
yes.
feminine and the feminist. The feminine is
Mm,
is the natural mother, the nurturer, the
beautiful.
carer,
Beautiful.
the
By
feminist.
design. The
Exactly.
feminist.
We embrace, resent everything about the feminine. They
Yeah.
resent it. Even if they look the part, inside they have such resentment and such, and it is the story as old as time, right? Because
Yes.
to me, the snake in the garden is Marx saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
but you could have
So,
more, you could
that's the
have."
thing. That's
And
the thing.
so it's the really, I do believe that this whole thing is the battle of the feminine and the feminist, but really it's the battle of what God is ultimately. And
Mm,
so we get the Judeo-Christian God is a God of redemption, and Marx has no redemption. It's a
no.
never-ending spiral. And the sad thing is, uh, I am reminded of the book where a picture of Dorian Gray,
Yes.
right? Like
Right?
you can have everything and it can look wonderful and people can be
Yes.
envious, but in the end, you are you are an imitation of life. And I feel like this is why we have to fight as parents and as, honestly, the only word I have is righteous people, and I'm not trying to be self-righteous here, but righteous, what I hear in that word is right. We
Hmm.
are right to protect our children. We
Yes.
are right to call out the ugly, the chaos, the hatred.
Mhm.
We are right to do those things because this stuff is so wrong. And I can't imagine that the people who throw 2 year olds into boiling water, when they go home at night, I can't imagine that they're in their soul okay with what they have done. Um, but I do think this
It's
eats your soul.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah. There are so many different Bible stories. There are so many different Bible stories that depict this choice between respecting what is sacred, appreciating and trusting the wisdom of how the world is designed on the one hand,
yeah,
stripping yourself of your narcissism and committing to doing what is right, versus the hubris, elevating your own will, your own gratification, your own ego, even in opposition to the divine, and asserting that will to the violation of what is considered sacred. And it always leads to destitution. It always leads to desolation. You will never, ever, ever get away with it. Jordan Peterson says the first act of envy was between Cain and Abel. I say the first act of envy was when Eve ate of that fruit,
yep,
because it was in response to Satan saying, "You will not die," but God knows that the day you eat of that tree, you will be like him. You see,
yes,
there it is. You will be like him, knowing good and bad. So at the core of envy is this greed, this insistence that I shall enjoy what the other person enjoys. And I'm prepared to break rules to obtain it. And that is
yep,
an envious drive. So the feminine
yes.
versus the feminist, the feminine being, depiction, the bride of Christ, Hannah, the mother of Samuel,
Right.
Martha, the one who anointed the Lord with the
Oh,
oil,
yeah.
Mary, the mother of Jesus. So that's the feminine. The feminist is Eve, is Delilah, is
Jezebel.
Jezebel.
Yeah, I just, as a believer, I believe that in the end, God wins. I just, what we have to go through in the process, I, you know, I just think that it's
It's
so important that we continue to say what's true.
I have
And
to
what I
say
always say is look on the other side.
it's not every day that I get an opportunity to talk about the Bible, and I have to confess, I have my own struggle. I have had my own struggle with religion and with Christianity and with the Bible. But it's interesting to see how the whispers are coming back, and it's something I
Yeah,
deeply, deeply appreciate. Deeply appreciate is my history, the way I was brought up, the Christian way. But as a psychologist, we don't do religious talk, or we have
right,
a very neutral. I have a very neutral, but a very appreciative and a warmth towards religious stuff that my patients bring into the room. So I'm not an anti-religionist, and I
right.
think my patients appreciate it. They feel safe, and they bring even their spiritual stuff into psychology. And even my African patients, love it. And
You have a warm soul. You really do. Like from the very first time I was
oh
talking to
well,
people, well, I was talking to
I've
people and I
I've
said,
I've I've a whip of a tongue too. Don't rub me up the wrong way,
that's what I always tell people. As nice as I am, you don't want to go the other direction because you know what? I am a mother and I fight like one. We did get some questions here, so I just want to hit a few
Wow.
of
Yeah,
them. Okay. What is the Rainbow Coalition? The Rainbow Coalition, correct me wherever I'm wrong.
go for it.
The Rainbow Coalition came after apartheid. Nelson
Hmm.
Mandela brought in a bunch of different people, different cultures,
That's
or
it.
not different, well, yeah, different cultures, different color people, and they worked
Into
together
cabinet, into
into his
cabinet, and
cabinet.
they work together. Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
and it was a pretty good time of thriving, and things were going
Oh
really
yeah.
well.
It was
Uh,
truly reconciliatory. It
yes,
was truly reconciliatory, and that man could have gone the other way. He could have gone the dark. He could have taken the dark route. He did
that's what I've
not.
heard is a lot of people were actually quite surprised
Mm,
that this
mm,
this terrorist did not go that route.
yeah.
You
Well, he
know,
was 23
sometimes,
years in prison, and
right.
he was he was served with communion. He was a Methodist, so there was a Methodist uh, minister who served him
Wow.
communion, and he participated in that. So
And maybe
so
it changed
yeah,
him. Yeah.
I think he did. Mm.
Okay. How do people feed themselves in South Africa?
So currently, South Africa still produces a lot of food. There are still there are very very successful massive farms in South Africa. Fortunately, these farmers tend to be rich enough to be able to afford electric fencing, guards, weapons, name it, right?
Right.
But South Africa produces its own food. There are some imports too, but it has largely deindustrialized. Deindustrialized. So certain equipment that South Africa used to produce themselves, they need to import now precisely because of affirmative action initiatives. And those companies just folded. And many companies are pulling out. Exxon, so petroleum companies are pulling out. Mines are pulling out. It's just, so South Africa has mineral wealth, base metals, platinum group metals, chrome, iron, copper, rare earth metals. But because of a certain politician, and he is like the chief over mining, and they want kickbacks. They want kickbacks. Because of that, it's become so stifling, no longer profitable, and all the big money mining companies just withdrew.
I mean,
Poverty.
poverty. This is a
That's what you get.
this is one for maybe another conversation, but it says once society is good at seeing and confronting cluster Bs, then what? What do we do with them? Well, we're teaching people to be cluster Bs. I mean, I don't think that all mental,
You know what you do with a
psychopaths and
cluster B?
sociopaths, you can create them, right? What do you do?
You know what you do with it?
What do you do? I
No
mean,
nonsense. No nonsense structure.
yeah,
You don't entertain them.
like a toddler
Bottom
throwing
line,
a fit, step over him.
you don't entertain them, and consequences as simple as that.
But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that I really appreciate this conversation. I always appreciate talking to you, but I think that ultimately we keep going every single day, right? Like that's it. That's all that we can do, and we keep telling the truth every single day. That's how you don't get demoralized. You tell the truth
Hmm.
constantly with every word that comes out of your mouth. You make sure it's true, and when you do that, I think it gives other people hope, and
Yes.
I hope that the people in South Africa have some. I think one thing that's really important is that what we see isn't how everybody feels. There are what in one documentary that I watched,
Hmm.
there was a boy who one guy was shot in the testicles, and he was a servant, and he lived, and he's staying with that man, and the man, he lost his wife and oldest son, and he won't leave South Africa because he said God is in the soil and in the
You
work,
see.
right?
You see.
And so there are people, what I always try to tell people is there's always, always, always good people everywhere. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of corruption, and I hope they get theirs preferably in this lifetime, you know? But
Yes. So the other person said their Bible stories, and we can always gain courage and hope from the story of Noah's Ark. Even with a deluge of chaos, there'll
yeah.
always be a remnant. There'll always be a remnant,
Mm,
okay? I always get courage from that. And then also pieces of cultural wisdom. You know, an African man once taught me a proverb that says, it goes in Sepedi, it says, "Sefahlego sa motho ga se sa mpša. Sefahlego sa motho ga se sa mpša." It means the face of a human isn't that of a dog. In other words, you treat a human like a human being. You don't treat a human like they're a dog. Sefahlego sa motho ga se sa mpša.
mm.
So you treat every person as an individual with dignity. Doesn't mean that you have to go along with what they demand of you. And sometimes you need to rip out, the
Yeah.
whip, metaphorically speaking. Sometimes you
Yes.
have to have a forehead of flint. It was the prophet who said, "Gave me a forehead of flint, a forehead of flintstone or flint." I think it was Ezekiel. Sometimes you have to have a hard forehead to take the battering, to take the slander and everything else. Give us courage. Give us courage to keep speaking the truth with boldness. Boldness. Acts 5. That's what the apostles did. They were filled with Holy Spirit and they spoke the truth with boldness.
So talk to me about, first off, do you know anyone still in South Africa who's
Yes.
okay?
My mother is still there. Um, my brother she's staying in my brother's house. My brother still has property there. My dad is still there. My uncle and aunt are still there. My cousin, my nephew. So we have wonderful friends, very good friends that are still there. My one nanny is still there. Um,
Are
the
they
the the,
afraid?
the helper,
Are they afraid?
she's living far out, very rural. So
Okay.
it's still very traditional, very safe, beautiful.
Okay.
It's so nice to
Oh,
go visit
good.
her.
Oh, good.
My other helper who worked for us just before we came over to Ireland, she's staying in a township just next to Pretoria. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen. Systems are collapsing. She said. She said, you will have to bring me over to Ireland. I'll come and work for you. I thought it's not that simple. If only it was that simple. But there are also embers that are being kindled, and we will see also miracles happen in South Africa. Just watch that space. Don't give up. Don't give up hope. Not yet.
And the last, how fast between that rainbow coalition of good things to the change?
To deterioration.
Yes, South
Oh,
Africa. How fast did it
did it
go?
go? Between 1994 and 2008? It's 14 years. So between 1994 and 2008 things were good. And then from 2008 to 2025, 17 years was quick. Was quick. Very, very quick. And you could see the deterioration year after year after year, and people didn't recognize it.
Even while it was happening.
While it was happening, that's what the illusion does.
So in America, Colorado just passed a bill that if parents misgender their kids, gone. That quick. That quick. One day this just happened in the last session. Washington taxes are so ridiculously high. I think I saw it's 30% higher for gasoline than other places. So
Mm, mm,
it can go so fast. That's why,
yeah.
friends, when you're watching and I say that South Africa, ideologically, it looks like 10 years ahead of us. It went
Mm,
fast. And the reason it went so fast is because of guilt. Do not. If you can
mm,
feel guilty, you can go back through your life and go, oh, I wish I would have been this person. And I thought this way about this, and maybe I shouldn't have. That's fine. But don't trade it for Marxism, right? I
In
mean,
in in super abusive relationships where a psychopath is doing the psychological abuse, the one thing they employ most effectively is guilt, because guilt can be paralyzing. And that is the one
mm,
Achilles heel of the Christian. A Christian feels guilt easily. But once you've seen through the tactic, it's game over. It's game over. You will not be seduced and paralyzed and manipulated by the psychopath again. So see through the tactic. See how your guilt is being leveraged against you. They hold you to standards they cannot live up to themselves. That is what happened in Animal Farm. That's what happened in South Africa. They hold you to standards that they cannot live up to themselves. And once in power, don't for a moment think they will hold themselves to the same standards. But once you see through that hypocrisy, you call their bluff. Don't you dare surrender your conscience into the hands of the psychopath. And the woke dynamics are envious, perverse, and psychopathic. Guard your heart, guard your conscience.
we have nothing to be guilty for. So I think that when people fall for guilt as Christians, they forget that and I'm going to speak first as Christians, and I'm going to speak not as Christians, and then I'll wrap up.
Mm,
But so as from the Christian point of view, we have redemption. We've been washed clean as snow. So we don't
right,
have to take on past generational anything. We just need to
right.
be better human beings moving forward. We need to emulate Christ on earth. He wasn't a socialist. I'm sorry. People
No
can
ways.
suck it on that. He was never a socialist. People came to him and said, "What about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this?" And he said, "You know what? I'm about my father's work." Period. That's what happened. Now, for the non-Christians, there is a novel. I cannot think of what it's called, but in it there's a statement, and it says, "When you were in power, we begged you for mercy because that was according to your custom. You gave it to us. When we were then in power, you begged us for mercy, and we denied you because that was according to our custom."
Right, wow.
You need to see that, friends. That's where we're at. That's where
Mm,
they're at in South Africa. Oh, poor us. We were treated so badly.
mm,
Now we get
mm,
to steal and loot,
mm.
and even the blacks are suffering because
Yes,
they're guilty and greedy, the people on the top. We will have the
yes,
same thing in America. The same thing. These people who are like, we can demand this of you, will not hold themselves accountable.
no.
If we would have gotten a Harris in the, I can't even imagine what that would have been like if we would have,
Mm, it would
right?
have been over.
Okay. If
It would
we
have been
get
over.
if we get AOC or Jasmine Crockett, the same thing. It has nothing to do with worshiping one person. I just want somebody who understands what Marxism is and says, "Oh hell no." Like, I'm sorry, but no. This this resentment, this poison cannot be. Again, that's what I mean by look over. Look over at South Africa. Look at the UK. Look at Canada.
Yeah.
They are warnings.
Look, look at Zimbabwe.
Look at
Look
Zimbabwe.
at Zimbabwe.
They starved. They starved.
Now,
So,
a
yeah.
few weeks ago, they had to cull a few elephants to feed people who are hungry. They had to cull a few elephants
Wow.
to cut them up to feed people who are hungry. That's what you get. Learn the lesson.
And you will starve. You will starve
Mhm.
physically and you will starve spiritually. And when you are so consumed with resentment, you will have no
And
one.
and appreciate your heritage. Appreciate your heritage. Mind your heritage. It won't take care of itself.
Yeah.
South Africa has a constitution. That constitution has become a passive observer of its own irrelevance. And a constitution is a piece of paper. A piece of paper means nothing if if it's not been given life. And you will only give something life when you appreciate it. Appreciate your heritage. Many don't realize what they have living in America. And mind your heritage.
Yeah, if we can hold it, you know, that's what Benjamin Franklin said. A republic,
Hold
if you
it,
can keep
protect
it,
it.
right?
Yes.
If you
Yes.
can keep it.
If. Whoa, that's a huge if.
It's a huge if that you never thought. When I was a kid, I was like, I don't even think I heard that when I was a young person. Because, well, people were working towards this. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Such a gem.
I needed it as much as you did.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Thank you.
So thank you. You are. I don't know. You're like a brother from another.
Oh, I love it.
You just have that kind of soul. So
Thank you,
it's so
Carrie.
nice to talk to you again. Have a great day.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.